Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al-Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to On the Middle East after our holiday break. My name is Amran Zaman, and today I'll be discussing relations between Turkey and Israel. Once close allies, the two countries are experiencing a period of intense hostility. The current tensions stem in large part from the war in Gaza, where Israel's brutal tactics have provoked global outrage. Turkey's vocal support for Hamas, in turn, is fueling anger among Israeli leaders and the Israeli public. For the first time, the potential for military conflict between the sides is being evoked, following last month's rise to power of the Turkish-backed Al-Qaeda offshoot Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria. This week, an Israeli government commission said that Turkey could pose a greater threat to Israel than Iran in Syria, and that the presence of Turkish troops in that country could increase the risk of war between Turkey and Israel. With us here to discuss this alarming turn is Turkey expert Gallia Lindenstrauss of Israel's Institute for National Security Studies. So welcome to our program, Gallia.
Thank you. Very good to be with you.
So tell us a bit about this Turkish hysteria that's consuming Israel at the moment. We just saw this report come out from the Committee for the Evaluation of the Defense Establishment Budget and the Balance of Power that talks about the risk of war with Turkey. Why is there so much hysteria? I mean, we know that the relationship has suffered hugely because of events in Gaza, but it's always been articulated that despite all the very harsh rhetoric coming out of both capitals, there still is a very, transactional relationship that persists, with Azeri oil continuing to reach Israel via Turkey and that sort of stuff. So please explain to us what has changed.
So we'll talk in a minute about the tensions between Israel and Turkey. But I think first I want to emphasize that in a way, when Turkey and Israel are on the same side, the sky's the limit. For me, the events in Syria resemble what happened between Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020 and then 2023, when Israel and Turkey were on the same side and Azerbaijan won. Here, too, you couldn't have seen the result of the toppling of Assad if Israel wouldn't have weakened first Hezbollah. So it was a combination, in a sense, of the efforts that led to the result that is now very favorable to Turkey. So that's just a prelude to discussing Tehran. But I just wanted to emphasize that at the end of the day, I think this does show the potential of Israeli-Turkish cooperation. But yes, of course, that there are tensions between Israel and Turkey, and we're talking about more than a decade of tensions and crises between the two countries. But of course, after October 7th and the fact that Turkey sides with Hamas, things deteriorated, and we have a complete trade ban on Israel that was imposed in May 2024, and currently, although there is some trade going through third countries, we were talking about only a quarter of the trade that existed before the trade ban was announced. But of course, Syria is a very important country for both Turkey and Israel. For both countries, there are vital security interests that are linked to Syria. For Turkey, it's of course the Kurdish issue and the Syrian branch of the PKK that has much of the control in northeast Syria. And for Israel, it's the issue of Hezbollah's armaments that have come through Syria from Iran to Lebanon. And so for both countries, this is very important. And I think at the end of the day, this is also a very classical security dilemma. What Israel thinks is defensive, Turkey sees as offensive, and what Turkey sees as defensive, Israel sees as perhaps offensive.
But what is it precisely that has led this committee, for example, to conclude that there could even be conflict between Turkey and Israel? I mean, we've heard a lot of stuff, a lot of accusations flying around. Erdogan, accusing Israel of genocide, and your foreign minister calling Erdogan all kinds of names, but this is a different level. So could you kindly unpack this for us and explain why it is that we're now talking about the possibility of war between these two countries who were, as you said, very close allies in the 90s, and you had Israeli jets train in Turkish skies?
So throughout the Syrian civil war, basically, Turkey was more interested in what was happening in northern Syria, and Israel was more interested in what was happening in southern Syria. But because of the new situation in Syria and the fact that it seems that Turkey would be very influential in Syria in the post-Assad area, this thing seems to change. Turkey's presence might also go to the south of Syria. Turkey is likely to arm the new Syrian army. Turkey is likely to give its products from its defense industry. Maybe Qatar will help fund this element. And there will be probably Turkish advisors throughout Syria. So Israel's operating room in Syria will not be as before. Israel operated frequently in Syria throughout the Syrian civil war, and now there is a new situation, and Israel is adjusting to this new situation, and Israel is not sure what is going to happen in the post-Assad Syria. Nobody is sure. On the one hand, maybe the new regime hates Hezbollah as much as Israel does, so maybe there is potential for at least not getting into collision. But on the other hand, we know the jihadist background of this new elements that are in power now in Syria, and hence there is concern what will happen in Syria in the day after, and very concrete border security concerns that things won't infiltrate to Israel's north. With regard to the committee, I think it should be emphasized that this is quite a unique committee in the sense of what it publicized. Usually we don't get such detailed reports public to see. But this committee was basically trying to convince the Israeli public that we need to enlarge our defense budget quite substantially for the next 10 years. And that is a very big burden, a tax burden that we will have on the Israeli public, and they will get much worse social infrastructure because much more money will go to the defense establishment. So the committee in itself is unique. The perspective, of course, is only once a month. They don't know more about Syria than any one of us, in the sense that we have a very short-term perspective on what is happening, but they did allude to a scenario in which Turkey will be dominant in Syria, and that might, they emphasize that might lead to a confrontation between Israeli and Turkish forces. I think most likely the fear is a mistaken confrontation, and here we really need to have communications channels between Turkey and Israel, to have deconfliction. We have the basis. Basically, the Turkish embassy in Tel Aviv is operating, except the ambassador. They're all here. So we do have the possibility to discuss. As you mentioned, there was in the past security cooperation, intelligence cooperation. Some people know who to talk when they want to.
Well, I mean, it's a very complex situation. Obviously, that this new government in Syria, its background, etc., raises concerns for everyone. It should do. I mean, including Turkey itself. I mean, Turkey has been the victim of extreme Islamist violence itself. So I think, if anything, this calls for cooperation, as you said, between the Israeli intelligence community and Turkey. And what we're seeing now, though, is Israel reaching out to another group in Syria, the Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the civilian administration there. And Turkey regards those people as terrorists and as an existential threat. So what is Israel's strategy here? Why is it doing that, knowing fully well that this is very provocative?
First of all, I agree with you completely that the jihadist threat in Syria is also can be targeted against Turkey, and we all hope that we will not see the terror attacks we saw previously by the Islamic State and before that by Al-Qaeda in Turkey. But this is a possibility, and of course, on this issue, I really hope Israel and Turkey can cooperate because nobody wants to see these terrorist attacks happening again. With regard to the Kurdish issue, I agree. This is something that is on the table in the sense that yes, the Israeli foreign minister is pushing this agenda. Although I have to emphasize, he's mostly talking about diplomatic supports to the Kurds. What Israel would like to see is that the U.S. forces will remain, and it is putting pressure that diplomatic pressures that such a scenario will continue to exist because these forces, they're not that many. We're talking about 2,000 forces. Some are in the northeast Syria, some are in the border with Jordan, and they have proven quite efficient in maintaining stability where they were operating. And also, with regard to northeast Syria, they were also instrumental in preventing armaments going to Hezbollah through Syria from Iran. So Israel has an interest to see these forces remain, and that's in essence, the most pressures are in the diplomatic realm. I think Israel has a little understanding of the Kurdish issue to its very essence. If you would give a Israeli policymaker and you would start telling him all the alphabet soup of the Kurds, SDF, PYD, YPG, YPJ, KNC, they lose attention quite quickly. Basically, Israel has a tradition of supporting the Kurds in northern Iraq, and as we know, the Kurds in northern Iraq, and especially Barzani and the KDP, don't necessarily get along with the PYD, and hence, I think it's a very complicated issue that Israel, at the end of the day, is not really set up to deal with. I don't think it's a priority. And the priority is in the south. That's why Israel entered into the buffer zones. That's where there is a fear that things will infiltrate into its border. Israel is just now dealing with with the evacuation of the population from northern Israel. They're still not back, even though we have a ceasefire with Lebanon. The population still is getting funding till February 2025, and that's the priority. So I think the Kurdish issue is overinflated.
Yes, but the way that it's being framed, particularly by your foreign minister, is quite different. It really seems to be targeting Turkey at some level, this fact of, being so supportive of the Kurds and framing it as, defending them against Turkey. It really takes it beyond what you just described, which is the presence of US forces acting as some kind of buffer against Iran, etc., which of course is far less of an issue now that Iran is pretty much kicked out of Syria. And for the Kurds, we also know that, having Israel on their side, particularly when you have Donald Trump in the White House, is of huge value because we know the extent to which Donald Trump listens to your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And indeed, Israeli officials in their conversations with me have taken credit for the fact that Turkey has not attacked Kobani, for example. So at least, in terms of how all of this is being perceived, it certainly does deepen, I would say, the chasm between Israel and Turkey. And how far is Israel willing to push this? Does it see it as some kind of lever to moderate Turkish behavior in Syria and also vis-a-vis Gaza?
I think there's basic sympathy to the Kurds in Israel. They're seen as a non-Arab minority that has traditionally had good relations with Israel, that is persecuted in the region, and is pro-Western, and hence also possibly very favorable towards Israel. We saw polls, for example, again, among the Iraqi Kurds, and we saw that 70% were in favor of having diplomatic relations with Israel. So this is considered a favorable community that Israel should approach. That's one thing. Another thing, I think this is right-wing Israeli government who's pointing to the hypocrisy of the international system that is pushing for Palestinian independence, but is doing nothing for the Kurdish independence. So I think there is also here something to point to the international community that a right-wing government in Israel is very susceptible to. If you really want to assist the Kurds, the foreign ministry will not help them, right? At the end of the day, it's defense ministry, it's intelligence. So I would listen to what they say. And you don't hear these remarks coming from them. You only hear it from the foreign minister. It's an agenda he's personally promoting. Of course, he has his weight in the Israeli government, but I think it's overinflated in its meaning. I think also the US has an interest in keeping its forces in Syria. Again, it's a very effective force in terms of cost benefit. This is also meant to be kept there to make sure the Islamic State doesn't rise again. And there was, of course, the issue of the SDF protecting the prisons, in which there's a lot of ISIS fighters still there. And you don't want, the SDF is basically saying, if we'll have to protect ourselves, we won't be able to guard the prisons. So there is an interest to the US. Israel doesn't have to push the US so much on this issue to keep the forces in northern Syria. Of course, Donald Trump is an enigma. He's coming into office. We know he has good personal relations with Erdogan. He's even had statements regarding this issue in the past week. So we have to see. In 2019, he was willing to pull out the forces. But then basically he was stopped in the last minute. Also, the Pentagon put pressures on this issue. I think this will be a dilemma for the Trump administration. I think it's very clear where the Israeli interests are, that the US forces will remain there, but I think there are also valid US interests to do so.
Clearly, and of course, their presence gives the US some leverage over the government in Damascus. And I'm sure that from Israel's point of view, that is of huge value, as it is obviously to the Kurds.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision-makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25, for a discount.
I mean, further along the road, do you envisage a scenario where perhaps Turkey and Israel might actually work together in Syria? Let's not forget 1998, when a Turkish general that went to the Syrian border and threatened war because, Syria at that time was harboring the PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan. And those threats carried real weight for one reason, because Turkey had this extremely strong relationship with Israel. And Syria actually expelled Öcalan after those threats, and it's widely believed that Israeli intelligence played a part in helping in his capture. Obviously, one would never hope that the common agenda in Syria would be to go after the Kurds. I think, it's absolutely key that Turkey fixes its Kurdish problem for its own benefit, for the sake of, stability and hopefully democracy someday in Turkey. But do you see a scenario where Israel and Turkey could find common ground in Syria?
I think both Turkey and Israel want to see a unified Syria. I do not agree with those who think that currently in the situation, Israel wants to see chaos in Syria. Chaos in a neighboring country, a failed state in a neighboring country, is not good for Israel. This is a state entity. If it's not a unified state entity, it will be used to harbor terrorists. Iran loves failed states and loves to use them against Israel. So this is not an interest of Israel to see Syria continue the way it was before Assad fell. I'm not saying that it's true that Israel, in some ways, it was comfortable for Israel that Assad was still in power, because he did not open a front against Israel after October 7th, and contrary to all the other Iranian proxies that did open a front. But once Assad fell, we have a new reality. We have to deal with the new reality. And I do think Israel wants to see a unified Syria. for a unified Syria, you have to have reconstruction. And if Western actors and moderate Gulf states will help the reconstructions, I really hope they will make sure that the new regime is also not one that will be hostile to Israel. I think it's possible. Again, the new regime in Syria hates Hezbollah. It has other priorities than Israel to rebuild its control over the Syrian territory. And I think it is plausible that this regime will not necessarily be hostile to Israel in a way that Israel would have to act the way it did before Assad fell in the skies of Syria. We also we had a good neighborhood policy towards southern Syria with the militias that are in southern Syria. And these militias do have still warm feelings with regard to Israel, or at least do not see Israel as Satan, as they probably did before Israel gave this support. And I really share your optimism that that Syria can be something that these countries will share common interest about, and that the 1990s, in which Syria was sort of a glue, will reemerge now. But we have to make sure that communication is happening now. We have to have the sides reassure each other that that what they're doing in Syria is not meant to harm the other actors, because if the communication will not happen now, the growing concerns in both sides will only be worse. And I really fear a situation in which we will begin to see hostility because of an accident, and not because of something purposeful. And that's again, we have to make sure this doesn't arise.
Well, absolutely. And of course, politicians need to be more responsible in their remarks, frankly. It's not helpful when both sides are so, maniacally almost promoting hatred of one against the other. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Gallia, and I'm sure we'll be talking again very soon.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of On the Middle East. For more in-depth coverage of the region, go to our website, www.al-monitor.com. Happy New Year and goodbye.